Hello everyone. This is a quick review of complex numbers, and to begin I wanted to show you all the diagram that explains all the different types of numbers. There's prime numbers, composite numbers, natural numbers, meaning the counting numbers, whole numbers, and then that includes zero because you don't count with zero. Then there's the integers, the positives and the negatives. The rational numbers are anything that you can write as a fraction. And then there's irrational numbers, which aren't mentioned on here specifically, but the irrational ones are numbers like square root of 7, pi. Those are irrational numbers. And then you have real numbers as well, which are part of the rational and irrational. So that's all of that. Complex numbers are the imaginary numbers, which include the letter I. So complex numbers have two parts. Complex numbers have a real number part and an imaginary number part. Okay, so you could have this being the real number and this being the imaginary part. Okay, that's a really horrible looking complex number, but it's certainly possible. Okay, all right, let's continue on here with just doing another example. Let me see if I can get a fresh blank page. Okay. Alrighty, there we go. All right, now when it comes to simplifying, the first thing we need to remember is that your letter I is just been defined as the square root of -1, and I squared is equal to a regular ordinary -1, in other words an integer. This is irrational, technically it's imaginary, and then when you square it, it gets rid of the radical and turns it into a -1. So in use, when you are actually using this, okay, here's what you need to memorize. If you see the square root of a negative number, i.e. -1 for example, you're going to replace that with I. Okay, so that's all you're going to do. You're not going to take I and write -1 square root. Okay, and if you see I squared, you are going to replace that with a -1. So this is what you need to memorize. Okay, this is what you'll be using 90% of the time. For example, if you are asked to multiply two complex numbers, let's say 3 plus 4i times, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm a little rusty on my writing here on the screen, and 2 minus 5i, let's say. Okay, these are two complex numbers, they're binomials, so we're going to follow the exact same rules as if you were multiplying two binomials like 4x and 2 minus 5x, okay? As if that was all that you were going to do. So we're going to do our distributive property. 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times -5 is -15, and stick the I on there just like you would an X. Positive 4i times positive 2 is going to give us a positive 8i, and positive 4i times a -5i is going to give you -20, and you need to think about what would you do if it was x times x? It would be x squared. So this is I times I is going to be I squared. Okay, so now the big thing is you're going to combine these two together like terms, and then this I squared is going to get replaced with times, that should be a times, -1, which has the effect of just changing your your negative to positive or positive to negative right there. So our final answer is going to come down to a -7i. We've still got our 6 here. This is going to become a positive 20, right? Because -20 times -1. And so altogether it's going to be 26 minus 7i. That's what you'll get when you multiply this all out. So two complex numbers gave you another complex number. Okay. All right, now let me see if I can't clear the screen again. All right, good enough. Now, just a quick reminder of some of the other things you'll be doing is simplifying radicals. So if your square root has a negative underneath it, say square root of -9, that's the same thing, or your final answer is going to be 3i, and here's why. Because this is the same as the square root of -1 times the square root of positive 9, and this gets replaced with I, and this gets replaced with the whole number 3. Okay, now a tougher one might be the square root of, say, -20, where it's not a perfect square. Well, just break it apart. Your -1 times +20, which is going to be your perfect square, times square root of 5. And if you need a review on how to do this, go to the next video on simplifying radicals and square root of 5. And then the order that you're going to put this all in, I prefer the whole number first, or the integer, then the imaginary, and then the square root last. Okay? Hopefully that answers most of your questions.